You've probably wondered why some people can connect deeply with you, make you feel completely understood, and then suddenly disappear, pull away, create distance exactly when intimacy was growing. Maybe you've experienced this yourself, felt that overwhelming urge to retreat just when someone was getting close to your real self. Or perhaps you've been on the receiving end, confused and hurt when someone you thought you had a deep connection with suddenly became distant, unreachable, almost like a different person entirely. What if I told you that Carl Jung discovered something profound about this pattern over a century ago? Something that explains why certain personality types, specifically the INFJ, INFP, INTJ, and INTP, have what seems like a built-in mechanism that creates distance precisely when relationships become most meaningful. And what if I told you that this isn't a flaw or dysfunction, but actually a sophisticated psychological defense system that serves a crucial purpose in how these types navigate intimate relationships? Because here's what Jung understood that most relationship advice completely misses. These four types don't pull away because they don't care or because they're afraid of commitment in the conventional sense. They pull away because their psychological makeup creates a unique vulnerability to what Jung called psychic infection, the unconscious absorption of others' emotional and psychological material. You see, Jung discovered that the INFJ, INFP, INTJ, and INTP types all share something crucial in their psychological structure. They're what he called permeable personalities, individuals whose psychological boundaries are naturally more fluid than other types. This permeability is actually the source of their greatest gifts. It's what allows them to understand others so deeply, to see patterns and connections that others miss, to offer insights that seem almost psychic in their accuracy. But this same permeability that makes them extraordinary friends, partners, and counselors also makes them extraordinarily vulnerable to losing themselves in intimate relationships. When they get close to someone, they don't just share thoughts and feelings. They actually begin to absorb and process the other person's psychological material as if it were their own. Think about this for a moment. Imagine being so psychologically open that spending time with someone anxious makes you feel their anxiety in your own body. Imagine being so sensitive to others' emotional states that being around someone depressed starts to shift your own mood and energy. Imagine being so intuitive about others' inner worlds that you begin to take on their problems, their pain, their unresolved psychological conflicts, as if they were your responsibility to solve. This is the daily reality for many INFJs, INFPs, INTJs, and INTPs in intimate relationships. What starts as beautiful emotional intimacy quickly becomes psychological overwhelm. They find themselves losing track of where they end and the other person begins. Their own thoughts, feelings, and needs get tangled up with their partner's psychological material until they can't tell what belongs to whom. And this is where Jung's insight becomes crucial for understanding why they pull away. It's not rejection or fear of love. It's a desperate attempt to find themselves again, to re-establish the psychological boundaries that allow them to function as separate, autonomous individuals. Jung called this the process of differentiation, and he understood that it's absolutely essential for these types' psychological health. Unlike extroverted types who maintain their sense of self through external validation and social interaction, these introverted intuitives need regular periods of complete psychological solitude to process their inner material and re-establish their authentic identity. But here's where the misunderstanding happens in relationships. When an INFJ suddenly needs space after weeks of beautiful intimacy, their partner often interprets this as rejection or loss of interest. When an INFP becomes distant after sharing their deepest feelings, it's seen as inconsistency or emotional manipulation. When an INTJ pulls back after allowing someone into their inner world, it's viewed as coldness or calculated rejection. When an INTP disappears after deep intellectual and emotional connection, it's experienced as abandonment or fear of commitment. But Jung would tell you that none of these interpretations are accurate. What's actually happening is a psychological necessity, a return to the inner world that these types need to maintain their sanity and authenticity. They're not pulling away from love. They're pulling away to preserve their capacity for genuine love, to prevent the psychological fusion that would ultimately destroy both their individuality and the relationship itself. Let me give you a specific example of how this plays out. An INFJ meets someone and feels an immediate deep connection. Their natural empathy and intuitive understanding create an almost magical sense of being truly seen and appreciated. They open up, share their inner world, and experience the beautiful vulnerability of genuine intimacy. But as the relationship deepens, something subtle begins to happen. The INFJ starts unconsciously absorbing their partner's emotional patterns, anxiety triggers, even unconscious beliefs and assumptions. They find themselves feeling emotions that don't seem to originate from their own experience. They start worrying about things that never concerned them before. They begin to lose touch with their own authentic responses to situations. At first, they might try to push through this, thinking it's just the natural adjustment that comes with intimate partnership. But as the psychological boundary dissolution continues, they begin to feel increasingly anxious, confused, and inauthentic. Their inner world, which is their primary source of guidance and creativity, becomes clouded with material that isn't their own. This is when the pull-away happens. Not as a conscious decision to hurt or reject their partner, but as an unconscious psychological survival mechanism. Their psyche literally forces them to create distance to re-establish their individual psychological integrity. And here's what makes this so painful for everyone involved. The depth of connection that these types are capable of is extraordinary. When they're fully present and engaged, they offer a quality of understanding, empathy, and insight that can be life-changing for their partners. The intimacy they create feels unlike anything most people have ever experienced, so when they suddenly need to pull back, the contrast is devastating. It's not like other types who might gradually become less available or slowly lose interest. With these types, it can feel like a complete personality change, like the person who understood you so completely has suddenly become a stranger. But Jung discovered something crucial about working with this pattern instead of fighting against it. He found that when both people in the relationship understand and respect this psychological necessity, it can actually create a deeper, more sustainable intimacy than conventional relationship models. Because here's what happens when these types are allowed the space they need for psychological differentiation. They return to the relationship more authentically themselves, more capable of genuine intimacy, more able to offer their unique gifts without losing themselves in the process. The key insight Jung offers is that for these types, sustainable intimacy requires what he called conscious relationship, partnership that honors both connection and individuation, both togetherness and separateness, both emotional intimacy and psychological autonomy. But before I share the specific strategies Jung developed for creating this kind of conscious relationship with INFJ, INFP, INTJ, and INTP types, I want you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what I'm about to reveal in the second part could transform how you approach relationships with these types, whether you are one of them or you love someone who is. Because Jung didn't just identify this pattern, he created practical approaches for working with it constructively, methods that can help these types maintain authentic intimacy without losing themselves, and help their partners understand and support this process instead of taking it personally. The solution isn't to change these types or to push them to be different. The solution is to create relationship structures that honor their psychological needs while still providing the connection and intimacy that both people desire. Think about how different your relationships could be if you understood that pulling away isn't rejection, but self-preservation. If you knew that the person who seems to disappear emotionally is actually doing the inner work necessary to return more authentically and lovingly. If you recognize that what looks like fear of commitment is actually deep commitment to showing up as a genuine person rather than a psychological chameleon. This understanding changes everything about how you approach relationships with these types. Instead of pursuing when they pull away, you create space that invites them back. Instead of taking their need for solitude personally, you see it as their way of preparing to love you more fully. Instead of trying to hold on to them more tightly, you learn to trust the process of their psychological rhythm. But Jung also understood that this isn't just about accommodation or acceptance. It's about creating conscious partnership, where both people's psychological needs are honored and both people take responsibility for their own emotional and psychological health. For the INFJ, INFP, INTJ, or INTP, this means learning to recognize the early signs of psychological boundary dissolution and communicating their needs before they become overwhelmed and have to abruptly withdraw. It means developing skills for maintaining their sense of self even in intimate connection. It means taking responsibility for their own psychological processes instead of expecting their partner to intuitively understand their complex inner world. For their partners, it means learning to see space and solitude as gifts to the relationship rather than threats to it. It means developing their own capacity for independent happiness and fulfillment instead of relying on constant connection for emotional security. It means understanding that these types' depth and sensitivity are inseparable from their need for psychological autonomy. And here's where Jung's approach becomes revolutionary for understanding these types in relationships. He recognized that their pulling away pattern isn't something to be fixed or overcome. It's actually an essential part of their psychological functioning that, when understood and worked with skillfully, can create relationships of extraordinary depth and authenticity. The problem isn't the pattern itself. The problem is the lack of conscious awareness and communication around it. When these types suddenly withdraw without explanation, their partners are left confused and hurt. When they return as if nothing happened, without acknowledging the impact of their absence, trust and intimacy suffer. But when the pattern is understood and openly discussed, when both people know what to expect and how to work with it, something beautiful becomes possible. The relationship develops a natural rhythm of connection and space, intimacy and autonomy that allows both people to thrive. Now, I want to share with you the most important discovery Jung made about creating successful relationships with these types, something that will completely transform how you understand not just their pulling away behavior, but how to build deep, lasting intimacy that actually honors their psychological needs instead of fighting against them. Jung realized that most relationship problems with INFJ, INFP, INTJ, and INTP types stem from a fundamental misunderstanding about what intimacy means to them. While most people equate intimacy with constant togetherness, shared activities, and frequent emotional expression, these types experience intimacy as something much more subtle and profound. For them, true intimacy isn't about spending every moment together or sharing every thought and feeling as it arises. True intimacy is about being completely authentic when they are present, having the psychological space to process their inner world fully, and knowing that they can be their real selves without overwhelming or being overwhelmed by their partner. This is why conventional relationship advice often backfires with these types. When relationship experts tell you to communicate more, spend more time together, and create more emotional connection, they're actually prescribing the very things that trigger these types' need to withdraw. But Jung discovered something fascinating about what actually creates lasting intimacy with these types. It's not pursuing them when they pull away. It's not trying to convince them to need less space. It's not attempting to change their fundamental psychological rhythm. Instead, it's learning to create what he called a container for their process, a relationship structure that actually supports their need for both connection and autonomy. Let me explain what this looks like practically. When an INFJ begins to feel psychologically overwhelmed in a relationship, instead of withdrawing suddenly and without explanation, they learn to recognize the early warning signs and communicate their need for processing time. They might say something like, "I'm feeling like I need some space to sort through my thoughts and feelings. This isn't about you or our relationship. It's about me needing to reconnect with myself so I can show up more authentically with you." And instead of their partner interpreting this as rejection or pursuing them for reassurance, they learn to respond with something like, "I understand. Take the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to reconnect." Then they use that time to focus on their own interests, friends, and inner world, instead of anxiously waiting for their partner to return. This might sound simple, but Jung understood that it requires a fundamental shift in how both people think about love and intimacy. It requires moving from possessive love to liberating love, from dependent connection to interdependent partnership, from fear-based clinging to trust-based allowing. For the INFJ, INFP, INTJ, or INTP, this shift means taking responsibility for their own psychological processes instead of expecting their partner to instinctively understand their complex inner world. It means learning to communicate their needs clearly and kindly instead of disappearing without explanation. It means developing the emotional intelligence to recognize when they're absorbing their partner's psychological material and taking steps to differentiate before it becomes overwhelming. But Jung also discovered something crucial about what these types need to feel safe being fully intimate. They need to know that their depth won't overwhelm their partner, that their complexity won't be seen as too much, that their sensitivity won't be dismissed as weakness or dysfunction. This is why surface-level relationships feel so unsatisfying to these types, but why deep relationships can feel so threatening. They're caught between their need for authentic connection and their fear that their true selves are too intense, too complicated, too much for most people to handle. The solution Jung proposed is what he called graduated intimacy, a process where emotional and psychological connection deepens gradually with built-in spaces for integration and differentiation along the way. Instead of diving into complete emotional fusion and then having to dramatically pull back, these types learn to share their inner world in layers, allowing both themselves and their partner time to adjust to each new level of depth. This might mean sharing one deep truth about themselves and then taking time to see how their partner responds before sharing the next layer. It might mean having one profound conversation and then spending time individually processing what was shared before the next deep exchange. It might mean alternating between periods of intense connection and periods of parallel solitude where they're together but focused on their individual pursuits. And here's where Jung's approach becomes revolutionary for their partners as well. Instead of trying to get these types to be more consistently available and emotionally expressive, their partners learn to treasure the quality of connection when it's offered. They learn that one authentic conversation with these types can be more nourishing than weeks of surface-level interaction with other people. They also learn to develop what Jung called emotional self-sufficiency, the capacity to feel fulfilled and secure in themselves rather than depending on their partner's constant attention and affection for their emotional well-being. This doesn't mean becoming cold or independent to the point of isolation. It means becoming whole enough within themselves that they can genuinely appreciate their partner's presence without desperately needing it. But Jung discovered something even more profound about what happens when relationships with these types are structured this way. Not only do the traditional problems of pursuit and withdrawal diminish, but both people actually become more themselves, more authentic, more capable of genuine intimacy than they ever were in conventional relationship structures. The INFJ, INFP, INTJ, or INTP develops the confidence to share their real thoughts and feelings because they know they won't be trapped in constant emotional processing or expected to maintain a level of openness that exhausts them. Their partner develops a stronger sense of self and independent interests because they're not constantly focused on managing their partner's complex emotional needs. And the intimacy that develops is unlike anything most people have experienced. It's not the clingy, possessive, boundary-dissolving fusion that many mistake for love. It's conscious, intentional, authentic connection between two people who are committed to being genuine rather than just being together. Jung called this type of relationship a conscious partnership, and he believed it represented the future of human intimate connection. Relationships where both people are committed to their own psychological development, where space and autonomy are valued as much as togetherness and connection, where each person takes responsibility for their own emotional well-being while also caring deeply for their partner's growth and happiness. But here's what Jung emphasized as absolutely crucial for making this work. It requires both people to give up conventional relationship fantasies and expectations. The fantasy that love means never needing space from each other. The fantasy that true intimacy means sharing everything immediately. The fantasy that healthy relationships require constant emotional availability and expression. Instead, it requires embracing what Jung called the paradox of intimate autonomy, the understanding that the deepest connection actually requires the strongest individual boundaries, that the most authentic love actually supports each person's unique psychological needs, even when they're different or inconvenient. For partners of INFJ, INFP, INTJ, and INTP types, this means learning to see their loved one's need for space as a gift to the relationship rather than a threat to it. It means understanding that when these types withdraw to process and recharge, they're actually doing the inner work necessary to return more present, more authentic, more capable of real intimacy. It means developing enough emotional security and independent fulfillment that you can genuinely support your partner's psychological needs without feeling abandoned or rejected. It means learning to value quality of connection over quantity of contact, depth of sharing over frequency of communication, and for the INFJ, INFP, INTJ, or INTP themselves, it means taking responsibility for communicating their needs clearly and kindly instead of just disappearing when they feel overwhelmed. It means learning to recognize the early signs of boundary dissolution and taking preventive action instead of waiting until they have to dramatically withdraw. It means developing the courage to be authentic about their psychological complexity instead of trying to be simpler or more straightforward than they actually are. It means learning that the right person will appreciate their depth and sensitivity as gifts rather than seeing them as problems to be solved. But Jung also understood that this type of conscious relationship isn't just better for these specific personality types. It's actually a model for healthier intimacy for everyone. Because when relationships are built on mutual respect for individual psychological needs, when both people are committed to their own growth and development, when space and autonomy are valued alongside connection and intimacy, everyone thrives. The pulling away pattern that seems so problematic in conventional relationship thinking actually becomes a healthy rhythm of connection and renewal. Instead of the exhausting cycle of pursuit and withdrawal, there's a natural flow of coming together and moving apart that allows both people to bring their best selves to the relationship. And this is Jung's ultimate insight about these types and intimate relationships. Their apparent dysfunction is actually pointing toward a higher functioning way of being in partnership. Their need to pull away isn't a flaw to be fixed, but a wisdom to be honored. Their complexity isn't a problem to be solved, but a gift to be treasured. If you've recognized yourself or someone you love in this exploration, I want you to share this video with them. Understanding and consciousness are the first steps toward creating the kind of conscious partnership that allows these beautiful, complex personalities to thrive in intimate relationship. Subscribe to this channel for more insights into the psychological patterns that shape our relationships and our lives. Turn on notifications so you don't miss content that could transform how you understand yourself and the people you love. And leave a comment sharing your own experience with this pattern. Whether you're one of these types who pulls away or you love someone who does, your sharing could help someone else understand that they're not broken, they're just wired differently, that their needs aren't too much, they just require a different kind of understanding and support. Because Jung's ultimate message about loving these types is this: don't try to change them or fix them or make them more like other types. Learn to love them the way they actually are, with all their complexity and depth and need for psychological space. Create the kind of relationship container that allows their unique gifts to flourish, and you'll discover an intimacy more authentic and nourishing than anything conventional relationship wisdom can offer. The future of love isn't about finding someone who never needs space or never pulls away. It's about creating conscious partnerships that honor both connection and autonomy, both intimacy and individuality, both togetherness and the sacred solitude that allows each person to remain genuinely themselves.